What if the very moment you feel your avoidant partner slipping away, is actually the moment their heart is quietly learning how to stay? There was a moment I almost walked away from you. Not because I stopped loving you, but because loving you sometimes felt like holding mist in my hands. You were there, yet distant. Close, yet guarded. I thought your silence meant indifference, your pauses meant doubt, and your need for space meant you were already halfway gone. I didn't realize I was standing at the doorway of something sacred, a psychological shift happening quietly inside you. You see, loving someone like you is not like loving the sun. It's like loving the moon. The sun shines loudly, boldly, without apology. But the moon loves in phases. It hides, it returns, it fades, it glows. And I almost left during your fading phase, not knowing you were gathering light to shine again. Then one day, something changed. It wasn't dramatic. There were no grand confessions, no cinematic gestures. It was smaller than that. Softer. You lingered a second longer when we said goodbye. Your messages came a little sooner. Your eyes held mine a little deeper. Anyone else would have missed it, but my heart noticed. My soul recognized it. That was the shift, the quiet turning of your inner world toward me. Avoidant hearts don't open like doors. They unfold like petals at night, slowly, cautiously, afraid of harsh winds. And when they begin to unfold, they tremble. Not because they don't love, but because they finally do. Your distance was never rejection, it was protection. Your silence was never emptiness, it was emotion learning how to speak. I realized then that your retreat wasn't you leaving me. It was you fighting yourself. Fighting old fears, old wounds, old stories that once taught you love was unsafe. And when I saw that battle inside you, I understood something most people never do. This was the moment not to leave. This was the moment to stay. Because when an avoidant partner shifts, they don't just love you, they choose you. And for someone who has spent a lifetime avoiding closeness, choosing you is the bravest confession they will ever make. So I stayed. I stayed when your words were few but your effort was growing. I stayed when your hands hesitated but still reached for mine. I stayed when your heart stuttered but didn't run. And slowly, beautifully, the walls around you didn't crash down, they softened. They turned into windows. And through those windows, I saw the love you had been hiding all along. People think love is proven in grand gestures. But real love, the kind that lasts, is proven in shifts so subtle they almost look like nothing. A softer tone, a longer glance, a quieter defense, a willingness to try again. Those are the signs. Those are the whispers of a guarded heart learning courage. And if you ever see that shift in someone you love, don't leave. Because that is not distance you're witnessing. That is transformation. That is fear turning into trust. That is someone rewriting their story just to make room for you. I didn't stay because it was easy. I stayed because it was real. And real love doesn't always shout. Sometimes it trembles. Sometimes it hides. Sometimes it takes time to believe it's safe. But when it finally does, it loves deeper than anyone else ever could. I remember the exact second it happened, though anyone else would swear nothing changed. The room looked the same, the air felt the same, and you stood there with that familiar calm expression you always wore like armor. But love has a strange instinct, it notices tremors no eyes can see. And in that quiet moment, something inside you moved. Not loudly, not boldly, just slightly, like a locked door loosening on its hinges. You didn't confess anything. You didn't step closer. You didn't suddenly become affectionate or expressive. In fact, to the outside world, you seemed just as distant as before. But I saw it in the way your shoulders softened when I spoke your name. I heard it in the pause before you answered, as if you were choosing your words more carefully, afraid they might reveal too much. I felt it in the silence between us, a silence that no longer felt empty but full of thoughts you hadn't yet learned how to share. Most people would have missed it. They would have called you cold, unreadable, detached. They would have mistaken your caution for disinterest. But love, when it's patient enough, learns to read what isn't written. And what I read in you that day was not distance. It was effort. Effort so quiet it almost disappeared. Effort so fragile it could have shattered if noticed too loudly. You started asking small questions you never asked before. Not deep ones, not obvious ones, just gentle curiosities about my day, my thoughts, my feelings. You didn't linger on them long, as if staying too close to emotion might burn you. Yet the questions themselves were proof of something shifting inside you, something learning how to reach instead of retreat. Your eyes betrayed you the most. They lingered half a second longer than usual, as though they were memorizing me without permission. And when I looked back, you didn't pull away as quickly as you used to. That hesitation, that beautiful, trembling hesitation, was the loudest confession you never spoke, the quiet evidence that your guarded heart was beginning to lean toward mine, inch by careful inch, like a tide testing the shore, wondering if it was finally safe to stay, wondering if this time the waves would be allowed to rest instead of retreating back into the lonely ocean they had always known. I used to think love meant closeness measured in constant words, constant touch, constant reassurance. I believed that if someone loved you, they would always lean in, never step back, never need space to breathe. So when you drifted away sometimes, when your replies slowed, when your silence stretched, when your presence softened into distance, I mistook it for fading affection. My heart whispered fears my mind didn't yet know how to silence. I thought you were leaving me in pieces, one quiet step at a time. But loving you taught me that not all distance is departure. Some distance is devotion wearing armor. You weren't stepping away from me. You were stepping into yourself. Into the private rooms of your mind where feelings echo louder than words, where emotions grow heavy before they become visible. You carried your heart like something fragile, something once dropped, something once cracked. And when love started to bloom between us, you didn't run from it, you retreated to understand it. To hold it carefully, to make sure it was safe before letting it breathe in the open air. I began to notice the pattern hidden beneath your pauses. Every time you pulled back, you returned softer. Every silence was followed by a gesture, small but sincere. A message sent when I least expected it. A glance that lingered when you thought I wasn't looking. A question about my feelings spoken gently, like you were testing whether love could exist without danger. Your distance was never emptiness, it was processing. Your space was never absence, it was preparation. It was like watching the tide. The ocean doesn't rush the shore endlessly. It pulls away first, gathering strength, gathering depth, gathering motion. Only then does it return, touching the sand more fully than before. That was you. Each time you stepped back, you were gathering courage. Each quiet moment alone was you building trust inside yourself, brick by careful brick. Until you could come back to me steadier than you left. And I realized something most hearts misunderstand. An avoidant soul doesn't measure love by how close they stand. They measure it by how safe they feel returning. Your distance wasn't a wall between us. It was a bridge you were learning how to cross, slowly, carefully, carrying feelings you had never trusted anyone else to hold, feelings you protected like fragile glass, feelings that trembled in your chest whenever you felt them growing stronger, whenever you sensed they were beginning to belong not just to you, but to you. See, always believed fear and love were opposites, like night and morning, like winter and spring. I thought when love arrived, fear would quietly disappear, as if it had never lived there at all. But you taught me something far more delicate, far more real, that sometimes love doesn't replace fear. Sometimes it walks beside it. Sometimes it grows inside it. And sometimes, in the quiet chambers of a guarded heart, fear is the very place where love begins. I saw it in you before I understood it. The way your voice softened whenever emotions brushed too close. The way your fingers hesitated when they almost reached for mine, as if touch itself carried questions you weren't ready to answer. You weren't afraid of me. You were afraid of what loving me meant. Afraid of how deeply it might pull you, how strongly it might change you, how impossible it might become to go back to who you were before we met. There was a night when the truth almost slipped out of you. We were sitting side by side, not speaking, letting silence do what words couldn't. Your shoulder barely touched mine, but I could feel your heartbeat through that fragile distance, quick and uneven, like a secret trying to escape. You inhaled as if you were about to say something important, something honest, something that would reveal everything you'd been hiding. But then you stopped. Your breath caught. Your gaze lowered. And you swallowed the confession before it could exist. Most people would have called that hesitation doubt. I called it courage in disguise. Because fear doesn't visit where nothing matters. Fear only appears where something precious is at risk. Your trembling wasn't rejection, it was recognition. Recognition that what you felt was real, that what was growing between us was not light or temporary or easy to forget. And that realization frightened you, not because you didn't want it, but because you did. I began to notice how your fear slowly changed shape. It stopped pushing you away and started pulling you closer, gently, cautiously, like gravity you couldn't resist. You still paused before speaking. You still guarded your feelings like they were rare jewels. But your eyes started confessing what your lips wouldn't. They held warmth longer. They searched for me in crowded rooms. They softened when our laughter overlapped. Fear was still there, yes, but it was no longer a locked door. It was a doorway you stood in, unsure, hopeful, feeling something new unfolding in your chest, something warmer than fear had ever been, something steadier than doubt had ever allowed, something quietly whispering that maybe love was not the danger you once believed it to be. Maybe love was the place your heart had been trying to find all along. Loving you taught me a language no one ever writes in books, a language without grand speeches or dramatic promises, a language spoken in pauses, glances, and breaths that tremble before they settle. At first, I didn't understand it. I was used to love that announced itself loudly, love that declared, explained, reassured. But you spoke in silence. And your silence wasn't emptiness. It was a dialect only patient hearts learn to hear. You never said, "I miss you," the way others might. Instead, you sent a message about something small you saw during your day, something ordinary that reminded you of me. To anyone else, it would seem casual, forgettable. But I knew that for you, reaching out at all was an act of courage. Every word you chose was carefully weighed, as if emotions were fragile glass you were afraid to drop. And in that carefulness, I heard devotion. You didn't hold my hand often. But when you did, your fingers tightened slightly, like you were grounding yourself in that contact, like you were silently asking if it was safe to stay there. You didn't shower me with compliments. Yet when you looked at me, really looked, your gaze lingered with a softness that spoke more than praise ever could. It said you were studying me, memorizing me, letting me exist in a space inside you that very few people had ever reached. Your love was never loud enough for a crowd, but it was unmistakable to a heart that paid attention. It lived in the way you adjusted your schedule without mentioning it, just so you could spend a little more time near me. It hid in the way your tone shifted when I was upset, becoming gentler, steadier, as if you were instinctively building a shelter around my feelings. It showed itself in your restraint, in how you chose not to run even when your instincts whispered that closeness was dangerous. I realized then that quiet love is not weak love. It is disciplined love. It is love that has fought battles before it ever reached you. Every subtle gesture you gave me carried the weight of old fears you were learning to overcome, old habits you were slowly unlearning, old walls you were carefully dismantling brick by brick. And the more I listened to your unspoken language, the more fluent I became, until your smallest actions sounded louder than declarations, until your silence felt warmer than words, until your presence alone began to say everything your guarded heart was still learning how to pronounce. There was a fragile moment when leaving would have been easier. The doubts were louder then, whispering that love shouldn't feel this uncertain, that affection shouldn't require this much patience, that maybe I was waiting for something that would never arrive. My heart stood at a quiet crossroads, one path leading toward distance, the other toward you. And what made the choice difficult wasn't confusion about my feelings. It was fear of whether yours would ever fully meet mine. You didn't ask me to stay. You never pleaded, never chased, never tried to hold me in place with promises. You simply existed beside me, steady but cautious, like someone standing near a fire they longed to touch but still weren't sure wouldn't burn them. And strangely, that restraint spoke louder than desperation ever could. Because I realized that if I left, you wouldn't stop me, not because you didn't care, but because part of you believed love was something people eventually walked away from. That was the moment I understood how powerful staying truly is. Staying, for someone like you, is not ordinary. It is transformative. It rewrites stories written long before I arrived. Stories that taught you closeness fades, trust breaks, and hearts that open too wide end up carrying the deepest scars. Every day I chose not to leave, I wasn't just loving you, I was gently arguing with those old stories. I was showing your guarded soul a different ending, one where affection doesn't disappear when things feel vulnerable, one where silence doesn't mean abandonment, one where presence can be constant without being overwhelming. And slowly, something inside you began to change. Not all at once, not in ways anyone else could easily see, but in quiet shifts that felt monumental to a heart like yours. You started lingering longer in conversations instead of retreating. You began sharing small thoughts before they turned into hidden feelings. You let your guard slip in fleeting seconds, revealing glimpses of the tenderness you kept protected for so long. Those moments were delicate, almost shy, like sunrise light barely touching the horizon. I realized then that staying isn't passive. It's a force. It's a quiet promise spoken through actions instead of words. Each time I remained beside you, I was telling your heart that love doesn't vanish at the first sign of fear. Each time I chose patience, I was proving that closeness doesn't have to mean losing yourself. And each time I met your hesitation with warmth instead of pressure, something within you softened, something long frozen beginning to thaw, something once convinced it had to stand alone now slowly learning what it feels like to be held, to be understood, to be loved without being rushed, to be loved without being chased away, to be loved in a way that finally made staying feel safer than running.